This Stealing the Mind Bible Conference presentation is by Stan Monteith and is entitled The Case for Satanic Conspiracy. For a free catalog of over 250 awesome Bible studies on DVD or CD, call Compass at 1-800-977-2177 or on the web at compass.org.
Well, thank you very much. I do 5 hours of talk radio a day on a slow day. Sometimes we do 6 or 7 hours, and then we have to prepare for our weekend program, which is a separate program. But I usually start the programs with this phrase: reality is usually scoffed at. Illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that's going to determine what the future will bring. And the talk I'm going to give tonight may bother some of you. You will probably not want to hear what I have to say. But of course, the reason we have listeners across America, indeed across the world, is because we tell you the truth, not what necessarily you want to hear. Now that phrase, reality is usually scoffed at, illusion is usually king, was a phrase that originally came from a congressman. His name was Larry McDonald. And Larry McDonald, all during the Vietnam War, was trying to tell the American people that the American government and American corporations were funding the Russians, who were funding the North Vietnamese, who were funding the Viet Cong, who were killing American boys. And he continued with that same message up until 1983. Of course, we were actually funding money. We've always funneled money to the communists going back to 1918. We have created the best enemy money could buy, but you see, that message is not very popular. You're supposed to believe what you're told. And communism is the enemy. Yes, communism is the enemy. But who funded that enemy? Larry McDonald was on Korean Flight 007 in 1983, went down. The wreckage of the plane wasn't found at that time. There was a massive search operation. The bodies were never recovered. When Yeltsin became the premier or president of Russia, why, of course, he gave the Americans the black box that had been on the plane, but it had been erased. And our leaders never asked what was on the black box. Is it possible that they knew? Well, if we have time, I will tell you the rest of the story. A story you're never going to hear from the conventional talk show hosts in America. Now, you might hear it from John Leffler or a few of the other people who would come here to talk to a program like this, to a meeting like this. But the truth is very seldom revealed in America. And that's a tragedy, because basically an understanding of the forces that have shaped the events of the 20th century is predicated not upon facts to be learned, but rather upon secrets to be discovered, and there are secrets. Benjamin Disraeli alluded to the secret in his book, Coningsby. He wrote that back in 1844, and this is what he said. Now, remember, Disraeli eventually became the British Prime Minister. He was Prime Minister on 2 occasions. So you see, my dear Coningsby, the world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. And most of you think that the President of the United States really has something to do with what happens in America. But of course, the reality is far different than what we are led to believe. Woodrow Wilson referred to this, and he was aware of the covert government. He gave a series of speeches in 1912, which were eventually actually converted into a book in 1916. It's called The New Freedom. That's the front pages, and this is what he says starting on page 15. Since I entered politics, I've chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody. They're afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they'd better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. And then Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I went through Colonel House's papers back in 1980. I went to Yale University to the special library there and spent many weeks going through the papers of Colonel House, one of the most important characters in contemporary history. I came across a letter that President Roosevelt had actually written to Colonel House. And on the second page of that letter, he said this: "The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that financial elements in the major centers have owned the government since the days of Andrew Jackson." Now remember, this letter was written in 1933. Andrew Jackson became President of the United States in 1833. Is it possible that there really are these elements? And we have these letters. You'll find this. We have the syllabus out here, which has all the material from this documentation of most of the things we will tell you, and we put it into syllabuses so that, well, I have this syllabus in case things get lost. We lose the PowerPoint presentation. I have to give this. But we try to provide the information for you. So there is a syllabus that goes with this and with many of our other lectures. Now, certainly most of you are well aware that it was President Eisenhower who talked about the military-industrial complex. It was President Kennedy gave a speech on secret societies and how we could not have a free society if there were secret societies. And people say he was talking about the Masons, but the Masons are only one of a number of secret societies in America, which you will never find discussed. And basically, Ronald Reagan, he gave a speech on the Iron Triangle. And it was in his farewell speech. He talked about this alliance between Congress, the media, and special interest groups, these people working behind the scenes who control our government. So what's the secret? Well, there's a mysterious group of powerful people who control the United States and direct the course of world events. Well, if that's true, why isn't the public aware of that fact? I mean, we have freedom of the press here. Well, no, ladies and gentlemen, freedom of the press means that if you own the press, you have the freedom to suppress whatever you want to. And certainly, I've been at this game long enough to know that the major media will not put me on any of the major things. I have occasionally been on something on national television, but I've had far more shows canceled at the last minute that I've been on. But basically, Edward Bernays, fascinating character. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew. And he described the techniques that he had used and that he had developed to conceal the truth from the American people. And basically, Edward Bernays was employed during the First World War to convince the American people we had to get into that First World War. Why did we enter World War I? Well, the Lusitania was sunk. Well, Lusitania was sunk in 1915. We didn't go into war until 1917. And it was simply because J.P. Morgan, some of his friends, bought up the major newspapers and used it for propaganda. And I'd love to hear the propaganda today, because it's just exactly as they used during the First World War. Oh, the wicked Huns were cutting off the hands of little boys in Belgium and cutting off the breasts of the women and raping and ravishing the women, and everybody believed it. Now, there wasn't a word of the truth in it. There may have been an occasional something, but the terrible things happened in wartime. But it was all a lie. And yet, literally hundreds of thousands of Americans volunteered in 1917 to go off and fight to make the world safe for democracy. They love these slogans. Change the world safe for democracy. The war to end all wars. That was the slogan that Edward Bernays developed. To sell the American people on the idea of we had to go to war. Absolutely no reason for that war. No reason for England to be in the war. It could have been stopped in 1915. But this small group that I'm talking about wanted the war, and this is covered in our other talks. One of them is called Iraq, the Untold Story, and I hope you get your pencil and papers out and you'll check out the sources of reference we go into, because we go into the background of the First World War was totally phony. And of course, when it didn't bring about the desired result, which was a one world government, then we had to have a Second World War, and that was for the United Nations. And when that didn't succeed, why, we made what John Leffler talked about today inevitable, and that is World War III. And World War III is coming. It's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. And this will be a terrible and horrible war, beyond even your worst nightmares. But this is what Edward Bernays wrote. Oh, Edward Bernays also was the one who employed by an American tobacco company to get women to smoke. Women didn't smoke. When I went to medical school, why, women didn't get cancer of the lung by the time certainly I was in practice, while women were developing the cancer of the lung as a direct result of the advertising campaign put on by Edward Bernays, get lucky, strike, have a smoke, not a sweet, all these wonderful slogans that he developed to get women to smoke, and he did, and he managed to kill millions of women. They died a day of lung cancer, totally unnecessarily. And then, of course, he was employed by the U.S. Public Health Service to convince us we had to have fluoridated drinking water because of children's teeth. And what they do not tell you, and which none of the black leaders in this country will tell you, is the largest study ever done in America was done on children, black, white, Hispanic. 450,000 children had a finger stick, took the drop of blood that developed, had it tested for lead. In the communities where they use hydrofluorosilicic acid to fluoridate the drinking water, the level of lead in the blood doubles in white children, goes up 4 times in Hispanic children, and 6 times in black children. And the black children get lead encephalopathy. There's work done by a Professor Roger Masters at Dartmouth. We have all of this. If you want to check it out on the internet. You check it out with us, get the material. Roger Masters, sociologist. He wanted to know what relationship it was between toxic substances in the environment and crime. So they checked the areas where, of course, you had used hydrofluorosilicic acid to fluoridate the drinking water, because this pulls the lead out of the bronze, it pulls it out of solder, it pulls it out of plumbing. And what's the level of crime in those areas compared to the areas where they don't use it? And of course, dramatic increase where these children had developed lead encephalopathy. Today in America, 1 in every 103 American adults is in prison in the land of the free. 1 in every 33 American adults is in prison, probation, or parole. But 1 in 3 young black men between 21 and 31 is in prison, probation, or parole. A lot of this, of course, is lead encephalopathy, and you're never going to hear this from the media. Edward Bernays did a wonderful job in controlling what the American people think. And this is what Edward Bernays wrote in his 1928 book, Propaganda. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen element of society constitute the invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. And that's absolutely true. The book, Propaganda, first page of the book, he lays it all out. But of course, Rush Limbaugh isn't going to tell you about that. Here's a fascinating book. They made it so difficult we can't carry it, but you can probably get it to a bookstore. It's written by Professor Ben Bagdakian. And Professor Bagdakian was the dean of the School of Journalism at the University of California in Berkeley in 1983, when he began studying the control of the media. And at that time, 50 major corporations controlled most of the major media outlets in the United States. 20 years later, in 2003, 6 corporations controlled 90 to 95% of the major media outlets. That's AOL, Time Warner, Bertelsmann, Viacom, which is CBS, Disney, ABC, General Electric controls NBC. The deal with Comcast has not gone through, and Fox, which has a vast media empire. They all have vast media empires. Those 6 corporations are affiliated with one another. They have interlocking boards of directors. And of course, they are affiliated all with the Council on Foreign Relations, which is one of the major forces working behind the scenes in America, which most people don't understand. My because very few people have been there and been through their records and really studied the background of where the Council on Foreign Relations came from, or what its true goals are. But I've spent many weeks back at their headquarters going through their records, and I think I can speak with a fair amount of authority on this. Now, Dr. Ben Baktian, he was a liberal. And so he believed that the wicked capitalists control the media. Most conservatives and Christians believe that the liberals control the media. And both sides are wrong. You see, what they want to do is play right against left, conservative against liberal, Democrat against Republican, as if there really was a great deal of difference there. Who does control the media? Well, Ian Fleming encountered this little group that controls the media when he actually was an agent working for British intelligence during the Second World War, and he talked about it in his Bond novels, and he called it Spectre, and that was the special executive for counterintelligence, terrorism, and extortion and revenge. He wrote about it in a couple of books, and then he died, one of those strange deaths that happens to many people who write about what really goes on behind the scenes. You can find their emblems of these secret societies. You find it on the back of the dollar bill. Many Christian leaders will tell you, oh, that pyramid, oh, that's a Christian symbol. It's got 13 steps on it, That's a Christian symbol. Because the Christian movement has been infiltrated, as the liberal movement has been infiltrated, as the conservative movement has been infiltrated. In fact, it's very hard to learn the truth. But what is that all-seeing eye? Whose eye is that hovering over the top of the unfinished pyramid? It's an unfinished pyramid. It's not finished. It's unfinished. It's waiting for the completion, which is coming, they believe, very, very soon. You'll find the emblem, simply if you go to Jerusalem, you'll find it engraved on the Supreme Court building there. You'll find it in the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. You'll find it in Masonic literature. You'll find it in a number of Hollywood films, National Treasure, The Man Who'd Be King. The emblem was discussed very well in Dan Brown's novel, The Lost Symbol, but most people didn't understand what he was writing about. Very sympathetic to Masonry and this secret society that had a secret message. And if you read Dan Brown's novel very, very carefully, you read it through 2 or 3 times, you will learn the secret. And then, of course, Manly P. Hall, who was a Satanist, a leading occult writer of the last century, wrote about this repeatedly in his articles and books, and there's so many references to that. You can find them up on the internet. But that is one of their major emblems, but there are really hundreds of emblems, and you can go to my website and see all of these emblems, and they just love to put them up. They hide them in plain sight. You see them every day, and you have no idea what you're dealing with. In fact, if you read their literature, you can read it, and they tell you exactly what they're doing and what they believe, and you can't understand it. Now, what part does Freemasonry play? Well, it's part of this. They've got a couple of million members, but most Masons are good people. They have no idea what Masonry is all about. I don't condemn the people who are in Masonry. They love the camaraderie. They do a lot of good. The Shriners Hospital, I was an orthopedic surgeon for 40 years. The Shriners did a lot of good. But I'm going to present the key to the mystery. And I want you to read this, and I want you to read it very carefully. It was written by Albert Pike, and he's the man who codified Masonic beliefs. And in 1871, he wrote a book. It was called Morals and Dogma. On pages 566 and 567, he wrote this: "The Prince of Darkness made Adam, whose soul was the divine light, contributed by the eons at his body of matter, so that he belonged to both empires, that of light and of darkness. But to prevent the light from escaping at once, the demons forbade Adam to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, by which they would have known the empire of light and that of darkness. He obeyed, and an angel of light induced him to transgress and gave him the means of victory. But the demons created Eve, who seduced him." That's the key to understanding everything. How many of you understand what I just wrote? I don't see any hands going up. And you have to understand, this is how they write the things. Well, you can get the ideas a little bit if you understand esoteric writing. They capitalize the deities. Prince of Darkness, capitalized. Divine Light, capitalized. Empire, capitalized. Light, capitalized. Demon, capitalized. Empire of light again, angel of light. These are all suggest deity. And of course, you have to understand that they write in esoteric means so that the average person is incapable of understanding it. Now, what no one will tell you, when you went to college, I don't know if it's when you went to college, but when I went to college, it was required to take philosophy 1A, the only thing you were required to do. And you're required to read Plato's Republic. Why is Plato's Republic important? Well, because what you're not told is that the Greek philosophers, starting with Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, were all involved in this movement I'm talking about today, because this is an age-old movement. They had one message for the common folks, for their students, but another message for the elite. And there's a book, you can still buy it, it's called Plutarch's The Age of Alexander. And Plutarch, writing in the 1st century, describes an interchange between Alexander the Great and Aristotle. And remember, Alexander the Great, with a little army of 37,000 Macedonians, conquered the whole known world. He went up against Darius, who had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of men, troops of elephants, and archers, and all of these things. And Alexander the Great is always winning. How was he able to do it? Nobody ever asked that. Well, in this exchange that is described in Plutarch's The Age of Alexander, why, Alexander the Great writes this letter to Aristotle, and he's very, very critical of Aristotle, who'd been his teacher. I mean, Aristotle had trained Alexander in the mysteries. And Alexander writes to Aristotle and says, "You've done a terrible thing. You have written a book. You've written a book about the esoteric secrets. How am I going to be able to control other men? How have I got to be able to accomplish what I do if other men understand the secrets?" And Aristotle writes back and he says, "You don't understand, Alexander. Basically, unless you have been schooled in the secrets, unless you've been personally taught, no one can understand them. Any more than you could understand the phrase that I had up there before about Adam and Eve. You read it, but you can't understand it because you're not supposed to understand it. Everything is concealed." Now, I'll go a little bit in the background of what we're talking about. Basically, Nimrod built the Tower of Babylon to unite the world about 2,200 years before the birth of Christ. Remember, the earth was formed, according to the Bible, about 6,000 years ago. There was about 1,600 years between the Garden of Eden and the Great Flood. About 200 years between the Great Flood and Nimrod. And Nimrod, of course, wanted to unite the world, but God intervened. Now, uniting the world has always been the goal of Satan. He's always wanted to unite the world under his leadership because he wanted to be as God. But of course, God intervened, and so the society under Nimrod was dispersed throughout the world. But it was at this point that the mysteries and the secret societies were formed. And of course, they basically, you'll find it spread on into Babylon, and of course, it is found in the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is nothing more than simply the mysteries of ancient Babylon, which were codified by the rabbis, the Jewish rabbis, during the Babylonian captivity. But of course, the secret, and there is secret power there that you can tap into, was certainly known to Pythagoras and Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. The Magi understood that. And of course, this is the basis of the Gnostic religion. It's the basis of the Templars, of the Rosicrucians, of the Freemasons, of the Illuminati, of Theosophy, which was formed in 1871. It's the basis of the New Age today. This is what Albert Pike wrote, and you'll learn a great deal by reading Albert Pike if you understand the things I'm telling you. But this is what he wrote, which will explain what I just told you. The occult science of the ancient Magi, the Magi understood the secrets, was concealed under the shadows of the ancient mysteries. It was imperfectly revealed, or rather disfigured by the Gnostics. It guessed at under the obscurities that cover the pretended crimes of the Templars. And it is found enveloped in the enigma that seems impenetrable in the rites of highest masonry. Magic was the science of Abraham, of Orpheus, of Confucius, and Zoroaster. What is the secret? Well, Manly P. Hall, though he was the leading Masonic philosopher of the 20th century, and in his lectures on ancient philosophy, Freemasonry is a fraternity within a fraternity, an outer organization concealing an inner brotherhood of the elect. The visible society is a splendid camaraderie of free and accepted men enjoined to devote themselves to ethical, educational, fraternal, patriotic, and humanitarian concerns, but the invisible society is a secret and most august fraternity whose members are dedicated to the service of a mysterious arcanum and canorum. Well, of course, I don't know how many of you know what arcanum and ancanorum are, but you have to go to the dictionary as I did, and the ancanorum, arcanum is the secret, and the ancanorum is the secret of secrets, the ultimate secret that has been so carefully concealed from you and from most Masons. Now, you have to understand that one of the major purposes of Masonry is to conceal the secret from the Masons themselves, because if they really understood it, most of them would leave this organization. They use those as a front so that people say, well, look, the Masons, there's nothing wrong with them. Look, all these great people have been Masons. They're good people, and they are. Most of them are good people. But this is what Albert Pike writes, and I give you the references to his book. Masonry conceals its secrets from all except the adepts and sages. Notice A in adept and S in sage are capitalized. These people then are deified, or the elect, and use false explanations and misinterpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled, to conceal the truth, which it calls light, from them, and to draw them away from it. So the average Mason doesn't know. Elsewhere on pages 8 to 19, he writes this: the blue degrees are but the outer court or portico of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he shall understand them, but it's intended that he shall imagine he understands them. Their true explanation is reserved for the adepts, capital A, and the princes of Masonry. So understand that these people who are actually learn about this are deified. It's like they were gods. Manly P. Hall wrote a fascinating book. We do carry this, and we offer it in our special section. In the book, The Secret Destiny of America, it was written in 1944, and he certainly was given hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is equivalent to millions of dollars at this time, to travel the world to collect all of the secrets and put them together and codify them. And you can go to the Philosophical Research Society in Southern California, and all the material is there. We actually have several DVDs on this put out by Chris Pinto, and we recommend them to you. But this is what Manly P. Hall wrote. For more than 3,000 years, remember, this is coming from the other side. This is what the other side says. For more than 3,000 years, secret societies have labored to create the background of knowledge necessary to the establishment of an enlightened democracy among the nations of the world. Men bound by a secret oath to labor in the cause of world democracy decided that in the American colonies they would plant the roots of a new way of life. Brotherhoods were established to meet secretly, and they quietly and industriously conditioned America to its destiny for leadership in a free world. Now, you must understand that they wanted world democracy. Have you ever wondered why? Everybody refers to America as a democracy. We're not a democracy. You can read the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers, the writings of the founders of this country, Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of every state. And you'll never once find the use of the word democracy other than to say, to decry it. We don't want a democracy. And yet, when you went to school, you were taught it as a democracy. The president refers to us as a democracy. The media refers to it as a democracy. Everybody refers to America as a democracy. Democracy, Plato wrote about it. He said democracy is always degenerating to despotism, and that's what they want. They want a despotic system because our Constitution limits the power of the central government. And these wicked people want to centralize all power in government so they can control and then crush you. And unborn generations. Then Manly P. Hall went on to write, the replica of the all-seeing eye, oh, I'm sorry, this is my explanation, my discussion. The replica of the all-seeing eye was engraved on the back of the Great Seal of the United States in 1789 and hidden from view there until 1935 when it was placed on the back of the dollar bill. And Manly P. Hall writes about that, and this is what he says, on the reverse of our great nation's Great Seal is an unfinished pyramid to represent human society itself, imperfect and incomplete. Above floats the symbol of the esoteric orders, the radiant triangle with its all-seeing eye. There's only one possible origin for these symbols, and that is the secret societies which came to this country 150 years before the Revolutionary War, which would have been in the 1730s, shortly after the Pilgrims got here in 1720. They've been here for a long time. Now, when a Freemason is inducted into the 32nd degree, this is what he's told. It was the remembrance of this science and religious absolute, of this doctrine that is summed up in a word, of this word, it find alternately lost and found again, that was transmitted to the elect of all the ancient initiations. It was this same remembrance preserved or perhaps profaned, in the separated or in the celebrated order of the Templars, that became for all of the secret associations of the Rose Cross, of the Illuminati, of the Hermetic Freemasons, the reason of their strange rites, of their signs more or less conventional, and above all, of their mutual devotedness and of their power. And if you want power, why, you're on the wrong side here. I mean, you may think that if we get the Republicans in, we're going to have the power, but the leadership of the Republican Party is controlled by the same people who control the Democratic Party, and they make mockery of most of what's going on. Yes, in our states, sometimes we do have the ability to influence what's going on, but in Washington, D.C., if you really speak out and try to do something, you'll end up like Congressman Larry McDonald, whose story I told you at the beginning of this talk. Masonic rites provide access to the other dimension. This is what you must understand. You live in a material world, but there is a mystical world out there. You live in a subjective world, but there's a spiritual world. You live in a visible world, but there's an invisible world. You live in a tangible world, but there's an intangible world. You live in a natural world, but there is a supernatural world. Almost every city in the United States has a metaphysical bookstore. Almost every bookstore has a section on metaphysical books, and many Christian bookstores across America have sections on metaphysical books that will allow you to tap into the other dimension. Now, if you're a Christian, you have to believe in the supernatural. I mean, after all, how could anybody walk on water, as Christ did, materialize after being crucified in a room that was locked, and then suddenly dematerialize? I mean, there is a mystical world. There is another dimension out there, but we are never told about this, talked about it. And of course, there is a Christian, there's a good dimension, and there's a bad dimension. And in this other dimension, of course, this is where the real battle taking place today is being fought. You can access the other dimension by using a Ouija board, by use of psychedelic drugs, psychedelic music, yoga, meditation, consulting a medium, visiting a fortune teller, studying astrology, engaging in the rituals of the ancient secret societies. In the Bible, we're told, don't go to fortune tellers, don't get involved with astrology, avoid divination, avoid all of these things. Why? Because our Heavenly Father realizes they're fascinating. And we're intrigued by this sort of thing. We need to know it exists. And then, of course, we need to avoid it like the plague or like fire. The Harry Potter books are the best-selling books of modern times. You know, witchcraft is the fastest-growing religion in the United States, and some of the richest men in the world have been or are disciples of the occult. J.P. Morgan was deeply involved in astrology. Andrew Carnegie was involved in spiritualism. Henry Ford was involved in theosophy and in spiritualism. The Mellons, members of the Rockefeller family, members of the Rothschild family. But nobody is going to tell you these things. Why? Because you're not supposed to understand what this battle is all about. You're supposed to think it's right, left, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat. But you see, reality is usually scoffed at. An illusion is usually king. But in this battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that'll determine what the future will bring. And I just made a partial list of the occult and covert organizations that are out there. And this would take me 3 hours just to go through this list. Well, I'm just going to go through them briefly. The Association of Helpers was the front organization for the secret society that Cecil Rhodes created in 1891 to bring about a world government. The Ascended Masters are people who have evolved to a higher level of consciousness. They're also known as the Great White Brotherhood. The Aquarian Conspiracy, a term used by Marilyn Ferguson, who wrote about this so-called New Age movement, which dominates our society today. The Aspen Institute certainly is a Brotherhood of Darkness think tank involved with this. Certainly this, the Bohemian Grove, the Bilderbergs, the black nobility. They're the aristocracy of Europe. They date back hundreds and hundreds of years, and they tie in deeply to the occult. The Baha'i religion, of course, advocates a one-world religion. The Club of Rome, made up of the elite, the bankers, the nobility of Europe, the Council on Foreign Relations, headquarters at 58 East 68th Street, which is a front for a secret society. Nobody's going to tell you about that. And of course, I had the opportunity of going through the papers of a professor named Carroll Quigley. He was taught at Harvard and Princeton. He was a liberal college professor. He went to Georgetown University, met his most famous student. His name was William Jefferson Clinton. And Professor Quigley told Bill Clinton how the world really worked. He got Bill Clinton appointed a Rhodes Scholar. And suddenly when Bill Clinton became president, he talked on a number of occasions about his mentor, Professor Quigley. But of course, Professor Quigley, of course, writes extensively about the fact that the Council on Foreign Relations was established as a front for a secret society, but nobody's going to tell you that. Of course, communism has been financed by the League of the Just, and it's here after 1918, financed by these same people here in the United States. You have to have an enemy. Why? Because you rally the people behind the government, and the government's going to protect us from the wicked communists. And communism is evil. And yet you look at the things that the communists advocated, and we've adopted them one after another right here in the United States. And the goal of the communists was to centralize all power in Washington, D.C., and that's what we've done. Well, of course, going on with the list, the Druids, Winston Churchill was a Druid. Oh, Winston Churchill, wonderful guy. He was a Druid, he was a Mason. And we could talk to you about this very evil little man, very instrumental in betraying both Great Britain and the United States. The Druze, they're an esoteric Muslim community, the secret society within the Muslim faith. The tax-exempt foundations, the family, they put on the National Prayer Breakfast, the prayer breakfast they call it now, and the president's always there. They're part and parcel of this whole thing. The Fabians, the Gnostic religion, the Order of the Garter, the Order of the Golden Dawn, the spiritual hierarchy. And we've got material on the spiritual hierarchy put out by the Lucis Trust, which they will tell you that they have their people planted at every level of government. And any of you who want their material, just send me a note or give us a call. We'll send you something published by the Lucis Trust, used to be the Lucifer Publishing House, about the spiritual hierarchy and their control of every aspect of our society. And as they point out, some of the people there who are working for us know exactly what they're doing. Most people don't. But we simply plant ideas in their minds, and then they carry out our directions. Certainly the House of Orange. This has to do with the Dutch nobility, the Illuminati, Italy, small number of Jews. This is not a Jewish conspiracy, but there are elements within the Jewish movement who are part and parcel of the Satanic movement. But there are similar groups within the Catholic Church and similar groups within the Protestant Church. And of course, they call themselves Christians, or they call themselves Catholics, or they call themselves Jews, but they're not. They, of course, have an allegiance to a different master. The Knights of Malta, the Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, the Lucis Trust, Robert Mueller, of course, for many, many years, the Assistant Secretary General of the United States, the Masons, 33rd degree and above, they understand what this is about. The lower Masons don't. Certainly, there are certainly things within Mormonism, because Mormonism actually came out of Masonry. And most Mormons are wonderful people. But of course, they have secrets that are not available to you and I. The New Age movement, the Order, Opus Dei, OTO, and organized by Aleister Crowley, the Prior of Zion. I'm not sure this is real. I think this is more made up to confuse us. The protocols. Protocols are a forgery, and we could talk to you about for an hour on the background of the protocols. If you read them, they are the exact blueprint of everything taking place today, but they were not written by a Jewish conspiracy. They were written so you would not understand who is really behind what's going on today. Of course, the Process Church of the Latter Day Judgment, David Berkowitz, the killer, who was accused, he was the talking dog killer. I forgot the term that they used for him, but he always claimed that his dog told him to kill all these people. Actually, of course, he eventually became a Christian. He talked about the Process Church of the Latter Day Judgment, and of course, Charles Manson was part and parcel of that. But the media would never tell you that, and the police refused to investigate them. All of these organizations are there. Lord Tennyson was deeply involved in the occult. Sidney Andrew Carnegie was involved in the occult. Basically, much of this is laid out. What this is all about in the editorial page article by Arthur Schlesinger in October of 1933, where he wrote this. And Schlesinger was part and parcel of this. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He understood what it was. The world of law will not be attained by exhortation. Let's not kid ourselves that we can have a new world order without paying for it in blood as well as money. Maybe the cost of enforcement are too great. National interest narrowly construed may well be the safer rule, but let us recognize that we're surrendering a noble dream. Remember the lines of Tennyson's poem that Churchill called the most wonderful of modern prophecies, and that Harry Truman carried in his wallet throughout their life, and they were all involved in this. And this is what the words say. For I dipped into the future far as any eye could see, saw the vision of the world and all the wonders that would be, heard the heavens filled with shouting, and there rained the ghastly doom of the nation's airy navies grappling in the central blue, till the war drums throbbed no longer, and the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. And this is all about a world government. And of course, we can go into the background of the various organizations here. But Barry Goldwater, writing about the Trilateral Commission, which is the most prominent secret society, or not secret, you can read about it, but you don't really understand what they do. The Trilateral Commission is international. It's intended to be the vehicle for consolidation of the financial and commercial interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. They've done that. Between 1977 and the year 2008, every president and or vice president of the United States came from their membership rolls. There's only 78 of them in the North American chapter. I mean, 6 of the 8 presidents of the World Bank, including the present one, came from the Trilateral Commission. 8 of the 10 World Trade Representatives, 7 of the 12 Secretaries of State, 9 of the Secretaries of Defense, 12 Secretaries of Defense, and, Hillary Clinton, our Secretary of State, her husband was a member of the Trilateral Commission. It's all a fraud, ladies and gentlemen. It's all a terrible fraud. That's the Trilateral Commission's logo. If you look very carefully, you could almost imagine you could see 3 6s there if you're paranoid, but there's no question that the center is an upside down. Broken cross, they love logos. And of course, basically, we talked about morals and dogma, and of course, the writings, and we're going to have to skip through much of this, but here's what Albert Pike wrote on page 321 of his book, Morals and Dogma. Lucifer, the light bearer, strange and mysterious name to give to the spirit of darkness, Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light and with its splendors intolerable blinds feeble, sensual, or selfish souls? Doubt it not, for traditions are full of divine revelations. And of course, they were known by others as well. Manly Behold, who we've referred to in the past, wrote, when the Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, in her book, The Secret Doctrine, wrote very clearly, in this case, it's all but natural to view Satan, The serpent of Genesis is the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind, for it is he who was the harbinger of light, bright, radiant Lucifer, opened the eyes of the automaton created by Jehovah, as alleged, and he who was the first to whisper, in the days that ye eat thereof, ye shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil, can only be regarded as a savior. And then you go back and you read what Albert Pike wrote about the Garden of Eden, and you'll find out, of course, what he's referring to. The Prince of Darkness, of course, who created Adam, is the God that we worship. And, of course, the God they worship is Lucifer. And basically, there are two gods. This is a Gnostic religion. And if you look at that very carefully and you understand it's all reversed, our God is bad, their God is good. Because, of course, that is where the power is. There are two gods. Lucifer is the powerful God. Lucifer offers freedom. The God we worship has all sorts of restrictions. He's got 10 commandments. You not do this, you should do the other thing. But you take away those 10 commandments, you end up with moral anarchy, which is why they took God and prayer out of our schools. They knew exactly what they were doing. Lucifer offers you wealth and fame, and we're going to have to skip over a great deal of this. But the Supreme Court was controlled by the Masons totally. From 1941 to 1971, the majorities of 5-4 to 8-1. Why doesn't anybody ever tell you that? The Masons control our Supreme Court, and the God they worship is the great architect of the universe, Lucifer. Well, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand. For back of all that foes have plotted, back of all that saints have planned, back of the schemes by men or demons, moves a higher hidden hand. Warp and woof are heaven's making, all the patterns good and wise, though on earth's side oft perplexing, clear and right in heavenly eyes. And though the cause of evil prosper, yet his truth alone is strong, though our portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. Let me just point out in closing, Larry McDonald did not die in Flight 007. If you go up on the internet, you'll find references to the fact that he was taken to prison. A few months ago, I talked to one of my regular guests. His name is Bob Fletcher. And just casually, he mentioned, oh yes, I talked to the fellow who was in the cell next to Larry McDonald. He was released from the Soviet prison about 1993. Larry was still alive then. If this is true, why have you never heard this? Ladies and gentlemen, reality is usually scoffed at. Illusion is usually king. But in the battle for the survival of Western civilization, it will be reality, not illusion or delusion, that will determine what the future will bring. I hope you will challenge everything I've said. We have a syllabus that covers everything we've told you. This is the substance of my programs. You can listen to us 5 hours a day. You won't get very much accomplished, but you'll learn a great deal, because we are involved in a spiritual battle for the souls of men and the survival of Christian civilization. And I hope all of you here will be challenged to try to disprove what I've said. And if you cannot, then you'll join us in this epic struggle for the souls of men and the survival of Christian civilization. Thank you, and God bless you. Good night.
This has been The Case for Satanic Conspiracy, presented by Stan Monteith. To receive a free catalog of over 250 awesome Bible studies on DVD or CD, all using and defending a literal translation of the Bible, information on upcoming Bible conferences in your area, or details of our missionary outreach and trips to Israel, call Compass at 1-800-977-2177 24 hours a day, or visit us on the web at compass.org.